Whoa!
Father Stephen. Oh my goodness. It's an honor to.
My name was said 3 times, and I follow Beetlejuice rules. So.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
So,
I did not expect Father Stephen.
Yeah, me neither. My goodness.
At Q, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition joke.
So what made you join Father Stephen?
Well, aside from Beetlejuice rules, I wanted to weigh in on this fulfillment thing.
Okay.
And save a bunch of people some time trying to fulfill your challenge, because they won't be able to.
Oh.
That was in the back of my mind, this for sure.
Father Stephen, there are people who are now going to call you a heretic.
Well, I can explain. Let me explain why.
Okay.
Because you have set the terms of the challenge carefully. Right?
You would think for $5,000 I wouldn't be like. Yeah. And I have to say, it's not my challenge. It's a challenge rabbis have done many times.
I have some challenges out there too, but I'm way too Dutch to put any money on them. So here's the thing I really wanted to weigh in on in terms of what Richard was asking. So what's going on with the concept of fulfillment, for example, in St. Matthew's Gospel, is not the way it's commonly talked about by American Christians. Shall we go ahead and say Protestants? And you and I both know, Jacob, that what Hebrew prophets primarily did was not predict the future, right? That was not their primary task or job description, right? So looking at prophecy as, well, this prophet predicted this was going to happen, and look, now it happened, right? Is kind of missing the thread, right? For the phenomenon of prophecy. And I don't think that's what the New Testament authors are doing either. So what, and St. Matthew's Gospel is really good for examples of this. You already brought up the Isaiah 7 example. Out of Egypt I have called my son is another example of this, right? Where if you're looking at it from that perspective, then you're absolutely correct that would be taking it wildly out of context and would make sense to no one, right? As a sort of prediction of the future and fulfillment. So the word that's translated fulfilled, the Greek word, that's a very literal translation. It means to fill full, right? To take something and fill it up until like to overflowing. And so what St. Matthew is doing is he's taking patterns of the way in which God acted in relation to his people in the Hebrew scriptures. And he's saying that these things we see in the life of Christ are sort of the ultimate example of that pattern. And of course, you could disagree with that, right?
No, I mean, this is the Midrashic. I don't know if you were listening when I was explaining Midrash, and I gave the pomegranate example.
I heard only little bits of that. I was on my way out of teaching my own Bible study.
Okay, so I mean, this is the thing, and the Midrashic explanation that people have started giving of the Gospels and Paul are certainly a lot more in line with Judaism, which is this idea that so like when we look at things in the Bible, we can give an expression of those values in a way that is memorable and sweet and meaningful, right? So the example I love to give is, paro is the same letters as ha'oref, right? And so what Hasidic philosophy teaches is that the point is to take what is in your mind and take it through the straits, Mitzrayim, Metzarim, of Pharaoh, of your neck, into the Eretz Rachava, right? The broad land, which is your emotions, right? And that's Moach Sholet al Halev, your mind controlling your emotions in a manner of godliness, right? And that's a beautiful drasha, right? You take things which the Bible already teaches and you give beautiful expression to them, and that's a beautiful thing. But you can't use these types of drashas to come up with tenets of faith. With this is how we teach and explain those things which the Torah gives us. They're not how we derive them, and that differentiation makes all the difference in the world.
Right. But so, for example, when St. Matthew uses "out of Egypt I have called my son," right? I don't think he's teaching any new tenet of the faith. I think he's making a comparison between the way in which God protected Israel, the man, and his family by bringing them into Egypt and then bringing them back out, right? Protected them from the famine and then brought them back out. A comparison to Jesus and his family being brought into Egypt to protect them from Herod and then brought back out.
Okay, so
last
night, Dominique Vanderklay was in Los Angeles, and Richard and I went and saw him. And Dominique Van Donk, who is another former CRC pastor, I don't know if you've met him, gave a beautiful expression to this joke I really love, which is a pastor is teaching Sunday school, and he goes, "What has 4 legs, lives in a tree, and stores nuts for the winter?" Nobody answers. Calls on Timmy. He says, "Timmy, what has 4 legs, lives in a tree, and stores nuts for the winter?" And Timmy says, "Well, it sounds like a squirrel, but I'll say Jesus." And ultimately, like, the ultimate form of eisegesis is I see Jesus, which is what Protestants really constantly do with the Bible. And I mean, I know that Jewish counter-missionaries have certain places where they will show people and be like, "So is that Jesus?" And they'll say, "Yes, obviously that's Jesus." And it's like, you look in the context and it's some horrible person doing some horrible thing, right?
Yeah.
And so this, if you're going to go look for Jesus and confirmation bias, right? But what are we actually talking about? We're talking about Christians, certainly when they're coming to missionize to Jews, trying to tell us that, okay, the life of Jesus means that Judaism needs to fundamentally change from how it existed before Jesus showed up. And my question is, where do you get that? How do you get that? What is the justification for that? Because if it's in the 24 books of the Bible, I want to know.
Right. Well, and so the question there, and this is, obviously our discussions are in a different place on how fundamental that change is, right? And how much, right? So if you're coming from especially a low church Protestant perspective, then yeah, that's a fundamental change. That's jettisoning the whole thing and starting over. But I don't think that's, yeah, obviously, I don't think that's where Christianity originally was. But I also don't think, on this topic, I don't think St. Matthew is saying it didn't ever really refer to Israel. This was really about Jesus. Any more than when I teach Isaiah 7, I pointed out to people that all this arguing about Alma and Parthenos is a waste of time on 23 different levels.
So, because was that child born of a virgin too?
No.
I mean,
no, the whole point is, this woman's about to have a baby, and before the baby is fully aware and knows what's going on, the Syro-Ephraimite war will be over. That's what it's about.
Yeah.
Right? In Isaiah, that's what it's about, right? But I think what St. Matthew is saying is, hey, remember how at that time the birth of this child was a sign to everyone who saw it that the deliverance of Israel was near.
It's a drush.
And he's saying in the same way, when Jesus is born, this is a sign that for him, because he believes Jesus is the Messiah, the deliverance of Israel is near.
Okay, but and this is where I haven't really started pushing back, which is I don't know if it's Matthew, I don't know who it was who says that the Jews didn't recognize Jesus, right? And then
That's
we get
usually
into
St. John's Gospel.
Okay.
He's usually the one who talks. Yeah.
Okay, so what was there for us to recognize exactly?
Well, so what St. John's doing as a running theme in his gospel is, there's some stuff about this in my dissertation. So there's been a reconsideration of St. John's gospel. If you go back to the early 20th century, like Rudolf Bultmann, critical scholarship, they were all saying it was Gnostic.
Okay.
Right. That it wasn't Jewish
I
at
don't
all.
know much about this stuff, but okay.
Okay. It was Greek, Then we discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls. Right.
Yeah.
And like so many things, right, got reappraised. And now a lot of people argue it's one of the most Jewish gospels, that it comes out of a community of Jewish Christians, essentially. Right?
I'll tell you my theory. I think it was originally written by a Jewish person, because I do see and James Tabor gave this analogy, which is much nicer than mine, which is that you can see the pebbles of Jesus's teachings and the Judaism, like the Jewish Christianity underneath the river, under the water of the Gospels, and I would say, I mean, for me, I can see the Judaism through the crayon, but what I see is it's like somebody's taken crayon to right. teachings which are very Jewish.
Right. So I think specifically with St. John's Gospel, what's going on is that he's involved in a conflict. I think this is borne out even more in 1 John, but it's present, very much present in the Gospel too, between Jewish folks who don't accept Jesus of Nazareth as the Messiah, and then St. John's community that does. And that the rhetoric against them is essentially, against the Christian Jews, is that they're essentially bad Jews. Right? They don't get it, right? They don't understand it. And so there are significant segments. We talked about one of them last time we talked, right? With the "We were never slaves." There are significant sections that are presenting the Jewish opponents of Jesus as sort of bumbling fools who don't understand Judaism. Right? And that's sort of a counter strike, a counter propaganda. No, you guys are the ones who don't understand the Torah. If you understood the Torah, you'd be with us, right? you'd accept Jesus, right?
Okay,
and the other side saying the same thing the other way, right?
That goes back to my question. What exactly is there that, I mean, we Jews today are missing? Like, how does what am I not getting in that I don't think Jesus is the Messiah?
Right. So, well, this is in one sense a different question now. Because at the time, this was a question of, this is a person who they'd met, right? This was a person who had lived relatively contemporaneously, right? And so that's different than the two of us talking 2,000 years later, right? So if you met Jesus in person and still didn't think he was the Messiah, that would be a different situation, right? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So this is the funny thing. So this picture, which isn't fully there, is a picture of the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, which many people who did meet him are still. I know people who are absolutely sure he is the Messiah. And a question that many Christians ask is, so how come these people are still Orthodox Jews? And if somebody says Jesus is the Messiah, you kick them out of church, out of the synagogue, and we do. And it's a touchy question, kind of, because honestly, if all they believe is that Jesus will be the Messiah, that's not a firing offense as far as things go within Judaism. But that's not what people mean when they say Jesus is the Messiah. They mean he is God and we should pray to him.
Well, we could put a pin in that for a second before we go back to that. No, before we go back to that, because I do want to talk about that. It's something you said on a stream a few days ago that I want to come back to. That's related.
You're listening to way too many of my streams for comfort.
Honestly, a lot of times it's either I'm driving or when I'm writing. I have it on in the background.
You can write and listen at this.
Bro,
I have to.
You write faster than I can read. I am still trying to catch up with everything you've written.
I have to, if I try to write in total silence, my mind wanders. So I have to have a couple things going on at the same time. But that's just my weird ADHD or whatever. But if you asked one of your friends who believes that the Rebbe is the Messiah, and you said to them the same question you said to me, what am I missing? Right. To not know that he's the Messiah, what do you think they would say?
Honestly, so at least in Chabad, it is an absolute given among the people who aren't crazy that this is just no. And I'm not even joking, because there are crazies, especially certain people will parade out who are like, oh no, this is obvious and you should know it. And among the people who aren't crazy, look, I never knew the Rebbe. I never met him. I now I'm sure that if the Messiah were to come during his lifetime, he would have been it. And I'll go even one further. You may have heard of the steerings about this new Antichrist, the Yanuka. He's been bowling me over. I've been listening to his stuff. Wow, like as far as I'm concerned, Cheskat Mashiach. This guy could be the Messiah. And I mean, I never thought I would see such a person in my life. But these are private hopes of someone who is great, in fact, fulfilling those things that we wish will happen. And that is just very Jewish, to see someone who is a great person who is an incredible person and be like, this God, like, is this it? And I think Franz Rosenzweig is best known for like putting these to words. And if that's all Christianity did and does, then, I mean, again, the way you describe Christianity to me, it's Judaism. I wonder when the Christians are going to turn to you and be like, who is this Judaizer? And you keep on telling me it hasn't happened yet. But like the Christianity you are describing to me is indistinguishable from people who may be wrong, but are not going to be excluded from the Jewish community.
Yeah. To finish that little bit of conversation, though, you notice what you said. You didn't say, well, they would make some argument from the Torah about prophecies that the Rebbe fulfilled, and that's why he's the Messiah. Right? Of course they wouldn't. Right? But so I think for the same reason, right, when you ask that to a Christian,
they shouldn't, or they do.
They shouldn't oblige.
Well, but they do.
So here's one question that hit me while reading Luke. What does Jesus say to the two men on the road to Emmaus?
When he's teaching the Hebrew scriptures, they open their mind to understand the scriptures.
I forget the wording, but it's something like he explains how it. Well, the wording is important, so I don't want
all the law and the prophets spoke concerning me. Is that what you're?
Yes, that concerning me.
Yeah. So this gets back to the thing I put a pin in. So that I wanted to talk to you, Jacob, at some point. So you were talking about, I don't remember how long ago this was, time dilation, but you were talking about the, I believe, Hasidic interpretation of Genesis 1:1, right? With the ...
That's not just the Hasidic one. That is considered
broader
Lurianic Kabbalah.
Okay. I guess between
Bereshit and
Bara, or between Bara and Elohim. Anyway,
no, between Bereshit and Bara. I mean, it's in subject verb, not verb subject.
Right? Yeah, it's the verb and the subject are reversed from English. Yeah.
Yes, and the et Hashemayim ve'et haaretz. That et is not the direct object marker; it's the preposition.
Can you
the heavens and the earth?
Can you quickly restate the non-technical?
Sure. So
I remember
there is a hyper literal translation of Genesis 1:1, which the Kabbalists make, which instead of in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, it reads, in the beginning, ... created God with the heavens and the earth. That at the beginning of creation, the first thing that needed to be created was this concept of God, because once you have a word God, you're moving from essence to emanation.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm not going to go to the New Testament yet.
Okay.
I'm going to go to our friend Philo of Alexandria.
Okay.
Who takes a similar line and he calls that God, right? Or whether you want to call that hypostasis of God, that emanation, however we want to characterize that, calls that the Logos, right? Calls that the Logos.
Right. Oh,
and it is
John 1 is thoroughly Jewish.
Yes, yeah. Have you ever read or heard Daniel Boyarin's lectures on John
No.
1
No.
through 18. They're fascinating. But anyway, he gave them at Harvard, of all places, at the Harvard Divinity School. That's to Christians. Well,
I have to wonder
Harvard
if
Divinity School.
I have to wonder if they will not. I will not find them infuriating, which I often do with academics who take Judaism and display it. Let me put it this way: when I see a Torah scroll laid out, like, and I've seen many places, like in a museum, like the Torah scroll is just laid out, it's jarring. It is.
Yeah. This is just him working with the text of St. John's Gospel, right? So it's a Christian text, not a, but he's interpreting it from a Jewish perspective, right? Yeah. So and Philo's doing a similar thing, right? So this is important in terms of, and this gets into, of course, also the monarchic Trinity, right? That when we say Jesus is God, we're saying it as a predicate, and we're saying that he is in particular that God, right? That he is the Logos, right? The incarnate Memra, right? Which is a different claim, right? And very quickly in early Christianity was disambiguated from the idea that he is the Father, right? So you may already have this from Bo Branson, but because Doc Branson mentions this a lot. But the way this is done in the Greek in the New Testament is with the article.
Hotheos.
So whenever it's Otheos, right?
Hotheos. Yeah.
That's referring to the Father.
So,
And
I mean,
that's never used for the Spirit or the Son, right? But so it's because of that, because of this idea that Jesus is the Logos incarnate. That's what connects him to all these patterns. The patterns of God's interaction with the creation is because he is that, right? And so these, when St. Matthew and other New Testament writers point to those patterns, it's not to sort of say, well, that original meaning was bogus, forget about context, forget about, right? And it's not to try to shove Jesus back in there, right? Like, or as Nietzsche said, every time a Christian sees a stick or a twig in the Old Testament, they say it's the cross, right?
Okay. Yeah, I see Jesus. Yes, I see Jesus.
Yeah, so it's not trying to do that, but it's trying to elicit these patterns and then show Christ as the fulfillment of these patterns. And this is huge in Orthodox theology.
So I was listening.
St. Maximus the Confessor.
I was listening to Bishop Maximus talking with John Vervaeke. Did you listen to that?
I haven't
interview?
yet.
You certainly should. You certainly should.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to pay full attention to that, I think, though. That's not having it on in the background.
So, and while I was listening to that, I mean, look, there's so much I could say here. The monarchical Trinity. So, one thing I've been trying to make clear to people is the mistake that Muslims make in their monotheism is as much mistaken as the monarchical Trinity. And like Muslims hearing this have been losing their mind because it is there are people who want to have a monotheism in which human beings cannot be called God in any way. And that is a rejection of Judaism. That is a clear rejection of Judaism. The idea that human beings represent God, right? And I keep on pulling up the background to my, like, the fact that human beings represent God is not Christianity. It is Genesis 1 and keep on going.
Yeah.
And
Imaging is a verbal idea, is how I talk about it a lot. Yeah.
And so for me, and again, it goes back to monogenes, and I mentioned, I've been mentioning in some of our Bible studies. By the way, Jason is the other guy who does the Bible study with me usually. He was a bit late, and but
started a job. No, I rushed home. Sorry.
It's all good. But so and this is the thing, if you're translating monogenes the way you seem to be, which is Yechidi, the same way that Isaac is Ben Yechidi, and right?
Yeah, that's how the Septuagint translates it. So 73rd century BC rabbis agree with me.
So it's like, again, you are not presenting a Christianity which Judaism has any fights with.
No, I mean, couple.
Well,
But-
yeah,
no, honestly.
So
Like,
Jacob, just to be clear,
Yeah.
The only place the fight would be, and I guess you wouldn't call it a fight, is the idea that the monarchical Trinity is technically wrong, but it's not a fight because of why.
So
Right.
the
There'd be
problem
disagreements,
with,
but not fights. Yeah.
yeah, it would. Yeah. So what's the thing? The distinction people make about error versus heresy. You know,
Sure.
you can be in error without being a heretic.
Here,
Right?
So it's just a in-house theological disagreement. Yeah.
I mean, it might. Look, the privileging of the number 3 in particular, as opposed to echad and rabim, right? So, like, we take, lo yachlu ahavad, lo yachlu amayim rabim, lo yachlu lachabot et ha'ava, right? The waters of the many cannot quench love, right? We take that very seriously, and this language of one and the many, right? And to reduce the one and the many to the one and the 3 is already something that is theologically not acceptable within Judaism, I would say, because of scripturally. Like, if you pay attention to where it says Rabin in Tanakh, like, the one versus Rabin, it is an absolute theme that once you see it, you can't unsee. And so, yeah, I have a problem with 1 and 3 as opposed to Echad and Rabin. But that's not the same thing as saying that Christianity is Avodah Zarah. That it's idolatry, which would be prohibited even to Gentiles, but certainly to Jews, as opposed to, you're not getting this little detail perfectly correct. Like, that's completely apples. It's beyond apples and oranges. It's apples in a chair.
Right. Because, well, yeah, there's no, correct me, because obviously you know more about this than me. I don't know of at any point where like Philo of Alexandria, who we mentioned earlier, was declared a heretic within Judaism. Has he been repudiated at any point?
I don't know that he's been repudiated, mostly because I had never heard of him until Christians started mentioning him. I honestly, I mean, the thing is, he was so early. There are, you know what? I think there are people. So the Mishnah in Sanhedrin, Perek Chelek, that talks about Svarim Chitzonim, right? Somebody who, a heretic is somebody who reads outside books, Svarim Chitzonim. There's a debate about what that is, and there are people who would say that, I know there are people who say Philo is what it's referring to.
Okay, so maybe. Right. But because he basically, I mean, it's not the Orthodox idea of the Trinity, but he kind of has a Trinity, right? He has God and his wisdom and the Logos, right?
Well, I mean,
so
okay.
And that's not, I'm saying, that's not outside the pale of Judaism, the way he has it, at least.
Well, I mean, when we talk about the Sefirot, right? When we talk about the Sefirot, right? They are, in a sense, God. You know, wisdom, Chokhmah, Bina, Dat, right? Each of God is love, love is not God type thing. So, yeah, I mean, there is far less of a fight.
Because when you say 1 and 3, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's really the Egalitarian Trinity also.
Maybe, but
when
you have three canonical, so this is where I think sometimes when I'm reading you or listening to you, you seem to be disagreeing with Bo Branson, which is he believes he seems to believe in 3 canonical hypostases. The Father is a hypostasis. The Son is, and the Holy Spirit is. Whereas you seem to be talking, the Father is essence, and the Son and the Holy Ghost, and I guess this gets into the Filioque, are hypostases in a sense. And this goes back to not depicting the Father, right? And when you're making that fine of a distinction, I mean, is the Father, when you say that only the Father is Aseh, in a very real sense in Judaism, you're saying only the Father is God, which puts you squarely into what Judaism would say, many people in Judaism would say is not only permitted, but might in fact be ab initio, lechatchila, the conception of, and this goes back to something you said in your in your book, where it says that God apportioned to the nations according to the number of the tribes of Israel, and you said there's nowhere where the nations are apportioned 12. Well, that's not how we read that.
Right, the 72 who went into Egypt. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so there is this concept that at least for many Gentiles, their relationship with God will not be direct. I sometimes put this like Jews are DC and Gentiles are AC, and that there is a relationship that is fundamentally different between the relationship that Jews have with God and Gentiles have with God. Like the chosen status of Israel is something that, I mean, the Bible teaches and Judaism teaches, and while I am reticent to talk about it, ultimately I'm not going to deny, just because people will lose their minds and get angry over it. I do believe there is a difference between Jew and Greek, woman and man, and free and slave.
So two things on that. First, in terms of Doc Branson, and I can check with him and make sure I'm getting him in correctly. I think part of the reason it sounds different is I think there's a little bit of an equivocation on our part, not on your part, on our part, on the word hypostasis. Because I know he agrees with me that the Son is a hypostasis of the Father. The Spirit is a hypostasis of the Father, and not vice versa.
Right? I may be misunderstanding him, but if there is this concept, and there seems to be, at least with some Christians, that the Father is a hypostasis of the essential ineffable God.
Right. That's the Egalitarian Trinity.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So part of the Monarchic Trinity is rejecting that.
Wait,
And saying, no, it's the Father. There's nothing behind the Father. There's nothing. St. Gregory the Theologian says it specifically. There is no essence behind the Father.
But by the way, since Richard is actually a catechumen in the Eastern Orthodox Church,
not yet. Not yet. I'm not.
Not yet. Okay.
I
was hoping you could at least get some credit, like we could for you catechizing him.
Put in a good word with somebody on his behalf.
Well, Father John, you know, oh gosh, Father John, Trenum.
Father Josiah?
No, I'm at St. Michael's Orthodox Church. It's a Western Rite Anglican in Whittier, California. I forget Father John Fenton.
Father John Fenton?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know him.
Okay, yeah. So he's
That's
my
his
pastor.
priest.
Oh, okay. He is a good man. I see him fairly frequently.
Okay. I actually got to meet him. I went to church with Richard. Yeah.
So, but I wanted to clarify the Egalitarian Trinity. So, because in this office behind me, is the office of Dr. Fred Sanders, and I had office hours with him a couple of weeks ago. I was like, so what, like, I said the word Egalitarian Trinity to him, or the phrase, and he was like, what is that?
Isn't he like one of the foremost experts on the Trinity?
Yeah, at least in Protestantism. But he knew what the monarchical Trinity was. But like he seemed to, it seemed to him that the monarchical Trinity was the only conception of the Trinity. Do you know what was? Does that make sense to you, Father Stephen? Why that would occur?
Yeah. So egalitarian Trinity is kind of something that monarchic Trinitarians came up with as something to call the other thing. And you had to kind of come up with a term because on paper, for example, even though they accept the filioque, Roman Catholicism, they use these dodges like we accept the filioque in such a way that it does not contradict the monarchy of the Father. And you're like, well, I'm gonna add 2 + 2 in such a way that it does not equal 4. So it's kind of this quasi quidem weaselly thing they do with that. But so on paper, they accept the monarchic Trinity. On paper, a lot of Protestant denominations accept the monarchical Trinity. If you actually ask them to explain the Trinity, it sounds a lot more like the Egalitarian Trinity.
So, and to clarify that, the way, so there's an essence. So you have God essence. You have God's essence, and then God the Father is a hypostasis of the essence.
Right. All three are hypostases of the essence.
Okay, so but in real monarchical Trinitarianism, God the Father is not a hypostasis.
Well, so he is not a hypostasis of anything. He is not of or from anything. So sometimes people will refer to the hypostasis of the Father or Father as a hypostasis because the term hypostasis is also used to mean person.
Right.
And so they don't want to say that God the Father is impersonal. They don't want to say he's like an impersonal essence, that he's the force or something. Right? That's
right. True.
And so that will be applied. But that's that equivocation I was talking about. That's the same word hypostasis being used, but used to mean something different.
So God the Father is both the essence and more simply a person. I don't know how to parse that out philosophically.
Right. Right. So when we say that when we say the Trinity is one in essence, that oneness is in the Father, the Son and the Spirit receive
divinity,
their essence from the Father. That's what it means that they're hypostases of the Father.
Got it. And then,
but there's nothing sort of behind the Father. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
So the first person to explicitly argue that it wasn't only the Father who is a se was John Calvin, amongst his many crimes.
So that's and a se is what? Sorry.
A se means that he has sometimes translated unoriginate in English.
Okay.
Uncaused.
Right, that he had uncaused. He has the divine essence in and of himself.
So, and you said Calvin says God the Father is not a se?
No, he says that the Father was a se. He was the first one to say that the Son is also a se.
Okay.
In fact, he said his phrase was that the Son is avtotheos, is God in and of himself.
Okay.
And would he say that of the Holy Spirit as well?
Yes. So John Calvin was explicitly an egalitarian Trinitarian.
Wait, but,
if not a tritheist, right?
Right. So would Calvin say that Jesus is begotten? Because how would that work?
Yeah, so many Calvinists do not believe in the eternal generation of the Son. So they believe that him being begotten refers to him being born of the Theotokos.
That's Mary, Jason.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, so I'm pretty sure that I was brought up with whatever you just described that Calvin believes. And I'm pretty sure most of the Christians still personally interact with, like, the church I go to would probably, if I question them, they would probably affirm something like that. Like, if I said to Jesus, like, God, they would say yes, and then they'd say whatever that word was you used, the O word. I feel like you guys are talking on another level right now. Trying to keep up.
It's just the Greek.
No, it's good.
Yeah.
No, it's good.
It's auto, like self, and then theos, God, right? He's God in and of himself. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did that that belief become so prominent then? Because that's what I always grown up hearing that.
Yeah. American Christianity is almost entirely derived from Puritan Christianity, which was Calvinist.
Okay.
The First Great Awakening, Jonathan Edwards, they were all Calvinists.
Yeah, because it wasn't until I think recently, like maybe last year or the year before, where I basically re-understood how the Trinity works, what everything it entails, and I feel like it's honestly, I feel like it's always right there. It's just people don't really wrestle with the propositions they're putting forth, because I feel like even with the Theotokos or things like theosis, once you really start exploring that, like what does that do to your idea of the Trinity? And that's what it kind of started to, I guess, reshape my thinking about it and everything. But,
yeah, one very common Orthodox definition of theosis is that we become by grace what Christ is by nature.
sounds legit. All right.
Okay, so can we trace back to why we got here? I guess we just got here to get a bit of the equivocation between you and Dr. Branson. So can you go back there and restate that one more time? I think I grasped it, but what exactly is the equivocation?
So essentially, right? Pun, I guess, now intended because I'm aware of it.
Nice. Okay.
God the Father is simply God, right? When we say the Nicene Creed, we say, "I believe in one God, the Father."
Yeah, sure.
Right? Those are Greek. Now, I don't know if you've studied Greek or how much, but those are Greek nominatives in apposition, right? That's identifying we believe in one God, namely the Father, right?
Right.
He is the one God, right? And then the Son, right? The Word, Christ, is begotten of the Father, so he's a hypostasis of the Father, right? Has his being from the Father. The Spirit, likewise, proceeds from the Father, right? It's a hypostasis of the Father.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in that sense, right, so the Father is not a hypostasis of either of the other two. He is not a hypostasis of any one or anything, right? In that sense, right? In the sense in which the Son is the hypostasis or the image of the Father, right? Or the Spirit proceeds from and is the image of the Father, right? The Father does not proceed. He is not begotten. He is not generated. He is not caused, right?
Yep.
So in that sense, he's not a hypostasis.
Yep.
Hypostasis is also used, however, to mean person.
Got it. Yep.
Right. And so you will sometimes see people refer to the Father as a hypostasis in that sense.
Yep.
We don't want to say that God is an impersonal force, right? Or, energy field or whatever.
Yep.
Right. And so, right, it
Yeah.
will sometimes be used, right, in that sense.
Got it.
And if you want the weirdest Calvinist variant, there was a guy named Cornelius Van Til. Good Dutch name.
Heard of him, yeah.
And he was looking at sort of the Calvinist version of the Trinity, and he realized there was a problem because he looked at it and he said, "We've got this divine essence over here, and then we've got these three persons over here." And he said, the divine essence now is like this impersonal force or something.
Right.
But rather than trying to go back to the monarchic Trinity, he just said, okay, well, the essence is a person too. So
what?
He said, okay, so God is one person and three persons at the same time.
So, Father Stephen,
well, that's what I was brought up, taught. Like that's what.
Oh, really?
People would
Okay.
that people would still tell me that, and that's what was always frustrating me. Because then when you question it, and you're like, "Well, how does this work?" Then they just say, "Well, it's a mystery," and I'm like, okay. And then, but I mean, that's really where it goes. And it was frustrating me for a long time, but but it's still I could probably name off more people. Most people around me I would that I know personally.
Yeah. Now that I think of it, I had the same problem, and I think the problem came because the distinction between essence and person is not made very prominent at all. So you just get the language of he's one person and three person, and that's all they give you. Right.
Yeah.
So
Okay, so I'm gonna
Right.
commandeer
Your channel, Jacob.
my channel back.
Please.
Father Stephen, are you aware of this language of Adam Kadmon and Adam Rishon and the difference between them?
Yes. Well, not. I'm sure you know a lot more about it than me, but I know roughly.
Okay. And so the idea is that Adam Rishon is a hypostasis of Adam Kadmon, right? So Adam Kadmon is ideal man, and Adam Rishon is as he was instantiated in Adam and Eve, right?
Yeah.
And when you were talking about Jesus is by nature that which we by grace become, it reminded me of the distinction between a tzaddik and everyone else, right? So tzaddik yesod olam, right? And like the Talmud says, God saw that there were few tzaddikim, therefore he spread them out among the ages. But the idea that the tzaddik is in fact born with a nature that is not as tainted by sin as the average person. And that in a very real sense removes him from everyone else. And you know, one of the things people have been calling Jewish or kosher Jesus, this idea that Jesus was just a Hasidic Rebbe from 2,000 years ago. I personally find that very convincing, including what I would say is reading John through the crayon. What I would say is the reinterpretation of John, and frankly added in texts in addition to what I would, so I'm guessing you don't like the critical analysis that separates some things in John from older things in John, but it seems very clear to me that at least when you're talking about what Jesus says in the Gospels, as opposed to the framing of what he says, the interpretation of what he says by the authors of the Gospels, there's a qualitative difference in how Jewish that message is.
Yeah, I mean I don't know how to go out that without going at it point by point, which of course would take eternity. But I think The immediate example that comes to me is so horribly controversial that I will skip it. Sometimes when I hear you talk about what you see as the interpretation that's being given by the gospel, when you talk about the Quran, I disagree with what you're presenting as the interpretation. I think the interpretation is different. So that's what I mean when I say going point by point, right? In terms of what claim the text is actually making as a text.
Let me
I don't think it's
introduce
as
you
far
to-
afield as you do.
Let me introduce you to Fezzy, because Fezzy is one of the most important people in my life. Fezzy lives in Jerusalem, and he was a Meishiv at Yeshivat HaKotel. And just to explain to people, because Fezzy would never say such things himself, to be a Meishiv at Yeshivat HaKotel is somewhat akin in Orthodox Judaism to being an undergraduate who is teaching a graduate course at Harvard. And so Fezzy, despite himself, is actually much more well versed in Judaism than I am, and so yeah, I wanted to introduce the two of you.
Hello,
Good to meet you.
Father Stephen. I wanted to say that I've appreciated immensely the talks you've had with Jacob so far. I think it behooves both Jews and Christians to dig as deep as they can to their roots to better understand themselves and the religions around them. And I salute you for doing well, not your dissertation, but really just your whole mindset. I think is one that's very healthy, even if the conclusion doesn't necessarily align fully with where I am or where Jacob is. To me, these are all data points of how we are all orienting ourselves towards the right place or the right direction. And like Richard said, this could be ideally, this will eventually turn into a more in-house theological question than one that is, between religions. But and like you said, Father, I think that it's really a point-by-point sort of situation. And you could see it live over here with Jason telling us, this is sort of how I grew up. I was told that, 3 are 1 and 1 is 3, and it's a mystery. And it's difficult because as you express yourself, I can't help but think back at our history and think like how different it would have been if people were aware of these things, or how different it would have been if people were talking about these things or articulating themselves in a much clearer fashion. But then again, these are the mysteries of God, and it's very difficult, obviously, to unpack these things. So again, I just want to say thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. And I as you were saying, it is, as Jason was pointing out, I certainly don't like what I say when I hear Jacob talking about how he reads certain things in St. Paul or in the Gospels. I don't blame him, because there are plenty of Christians who will tell him that that's exactly what it means, right? So I mean, I don't in America especially, I don't blame him for seeing that. And so there are a lot of things. Why not just be super controversial? Jacob brought up the whole blood libel thing in St. Matthew's Gospel. I think that's a horrible misinterpretation of what's going on there in the text of St. Matthew's Gospel. But I can't deny that historically that text was weaponized against Jewish people, right? Like, and me pointing out how that was a horribly wrong interpretation doesn't go and undo that, right? Like, that doesn't make that all better.
That's true, but I think also the Jewish community needs to know when, and this is very difficult, and Jacob, you might shake your head, but we also have to know when to let go, because once we understand that those, like you just said, that text was weaponized, then, I mean, we also then at the same vein have to realize that the Vatican comes out in 2015 and says that, the Jews don't necessarily need salvation through Christ. That's another thing that the Vatican came out saying as well. And we have to hold two of those things together, where there is that historical tension and there's a lot of bloodshed. But if we want to move forward, it requires to dig deep. There's a rabbi that says that we are two religions that are, or like two trees that are planted in the same pond, basically. They're saying, or they're absorbing their water from the same location. And at this point, after 2,000 years, and like you're saying, due to the misunderstanding of a lot of the text, we would only know Judaism better if we better understand Christianity or their interpretations of how of many of these concepts, whether it's grace or whether it's your understanding of even the Holy Spirit. These are things that, while they're different than us in our understanding, we could learn from them, or we could use them to reflect back light at how we see certain things. I wouldn't.
This is what happens when Fezzy gets a call.
The deep state took him out.
He's on his phone, and right now he's in Israel. He's in Jerusalem. He's actually one of the most successful architects in Jerusalem, because he refused to get ordained as a rabbi, but he's frankly, I think if you're having these conversations, he may not be as well versed in Christianity as I am, but he's certainly far more well versed in Judaism than I am.
Well, obviously, off of what he was saying before we lost him, as is obvious from like my books and stuff, I don't think you can understand Christianity without understanding the reality of first century BC, first century AD Judaism. That I think most of, including the things we've been talking about since I came on the stream, most of the way these things are gotten wrong from the New Testament is because people are coming at them with zero knowledge of Judaism and of the historical context of where and when they were written. So you end up with Martin Luther's reading of Paul.
But that was deliberate. I mean, when you look at the Nicene, I mean, I haven't read the council documents of the Nicaea, but I have certainly heard about their very deliberate break with Judaism. And Justin Martyr's, I read his debates with Trifo, whether or not that was Rabbi Tarfon is beside the point.
I'm pretty sure it wasn't. I think that's a Socratic dialogue where that's a fake interlocutor. But
I certainly seemed like a fake Jew to me. But there was a deliberate divorce from Judaism by Christianity. I mean,
yeah, especially once you get into the 4th century. Yeah. But I think that was a contemporary divorce at the time, not a retroactive one. And by that I mean, like I mentioned St. John Chrysostom's sermons against the Judaizers, where the reality was, in a city like Antioch with such a huge Jewish population, Judaism was more popular than Christianity among Christians to a certain extent, right? And that they were not coming to Pascha services at the Christian cathedral. They were going to celebrate Passover right,
okay,
at the synagogue. And he's having to yell at his people, what are you doing? You're Christians. You should be here, right?
So I mean, I have to say that this has repeated itself in history with the Messianic movement, when the Baptists created Jews for Jesus and opened these synagogues that were outwardly Jewish and actually just churches, and as opposed to converting Jews to Christianity, what happened was they created the Noahide movement, which exists thanks to them, and many converts to Judaism, because it's controversial, but several people have said it, and it seems true to me that there's a reason why Christian children are not taught Hebrew. Frankly, I think if Christian children were taught Hebrew, Christianity would be Judaized in at least the ways that you seem to be to me to be Judaizing it.
Yeah, I wish someone had taught me Hebrew as a kid. It would have been much easier to learn than when I was an adult. So I'd probably know it much better.
I think the founding fathers once had an idea potentially of having, having the official language of America being in Hebrew.
Yeah, this was actually discussed among the founding fathers. Didn't happen.
yeah, obviously. I think we have to keep the history in mind too when we're talking about like Nicaea, where Christianity is coming out of being persecuted by Rome, not by Jewish people. Coming out of being persecuted by Rome. And so they're at a point following Nicaea where Christianity is trying to start building institutions. Right? They've already, to some extent, been separated from Judaism. They're trying to start building institutions and building a Christian church and setting up catechetical schools and these kind of things. And in major cities like Antioch and Alexandria, the Jewish community was there and had established institutions that had been there for centuries already. And so I think that's responsible for why we see so many Christians going to these more established, right, traditional things. And so a lot of that deliberate separation language is, I think, based on trying to begin to build those separate institutions. And you could say, well, maybe it would have been better at that point if there had been some attempt at reconciliation. That may be true. I don't know enough about 4th century Judaism to know if that desire would have been reciprocated at that time still or not. But I think that's what's behind it. I don't think at that point, because we've been sold a bill of goods on Constantine and that era of the church, right? Not only did they not go around killing heretics, there was an Arian church functioning in Constantinople for more than a century after the Council of Nicaea. They let the condemned heretics for more than 100 years have a church. Like right there practicing their heresy. And it was actually Nestorius, who was later condemned as a heretic, who shut it down.
Okay, so I mean, I know that Constantine is much more revered certainly among Catholics, but even beyond that for Eastern Orthodox. I mean, he is a saint, right? And
he's a saint for how he ended his life, not for how he lived his life. Which is an important distinction.
Okay,
yeah.
So for me, like the idea that he waited until his deathbed to be baptized because he had some sinning to do. Okay.
That's a misnomer. That's actually not true. I know you've been told that.
I have.
But he had a baptism planned. He was about to begin an Eastern campaign, an Eastern military campaign, and he wanted to get baptized in the Jordan. He had it all set up. The Patriarch of Jerusalem was going to come out and baptize him in the Jordan River on his way to go into battle, and that's when he got sick. And he never went on that campaign. And when it was clear that that sickness was going to lead to his death, they immediately did a baptism where he was, in Constantinople. So he was baptized basically on his deathbed, but that was not the original plan. That was because his original. Now, going and getting baptized with a lot of pomp and circumstance at the Jordan, there are things you could say about that too, right? Like, but that was his original plan, not a deathbed baptism. And once he was baptized, he lived for more than a month after that. And he refused to take off his baptismal robe. He wore nothing else for the rest of his life. He let his beard grow. He let his hair grow, right? He devoted himself to prayer for those last 30 days. And that's why we call him a saint, is that thing that happened there at the end.
Okay, so I have to ask, where does this sprinkling water and that being some sort of toiveling, like...
we don't do that.
I don't know. Jewish mikvah as opposed to... Okay, so, like, that's completely
We immerse
outside.
3 times. Okay. We immerse 3 times.
Yeah. I see.
I would think, if I was guessing, I would think it would come from the Leviticus, where Moses sprinkles.
Sprinkle?
And so I would think they would have taken that. Well, that's what my Bible says.
That was
he sprinkles,
blood,
I think he
though,
sprinkles blood. Yeah, he sprinkles blood. Yeah. But that would have been my guess. But I grew up in Protestant circles, so they would probably be like, "Hey, we do this thing." But
the only thing I can think of on that is in some of the early baptismal instructions, they kind of talk about emergency cases. And they say, so ideally you want to immerse them 3 times in running water. That's the ideal, like in a river. If you don't have running water,
so an actual mikvah,
yeah. If you don't have running water available, then you immerse them 3 times in still water, right? But even some of the early baptistries had, like, it was like a stream flowing through it, right? Even though it was an indoor. And then some of them say if you don't have that, then you can get water and pour it over their head. That's still not sprinkling, but that's the closest I could find, like an emergency where you just don't have access to water. I guess you're baptizing someone out in the desert.
Well, no, I mean,
pour a canteen over them or something, but
these are things, you know, in terms of toiveling, in going to the mikvah, right? So these are questions that have been, continue to be important questions in Jewish ritual life. But yeah, I mean, don't know what to tell you.
So yeah, that sprinkling thing is a very Western, fairly recent, mostly. Well, I guess the Catholics do that now too, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
My grandchildren, or not grandchildren, what do they call it? What is like what do you call that?
Your godchildren?
Godchildren, yes. Godchildren. They got baptized Catholic about 2 years ago, and they're still Jesus proclaimed. So.
Yeah. So we have a big horse trough that we use here.
Yeah, my Protestant church has like a hot tub thing, like a big rectangle, and they dunk here. But it's like all warm and stuff.
Yeah. So we still have the other stages though. So for example, a young couple in my parish just had a baby. So we do the naming prayers on the 8th day. I don't do an actual bris. They're Gentiles, but right, we do the naming prayer, naming prayers to give the baby the name, and then on the 40th day, I brought him into the church and took him to the altar, name him back, and then baptism comes after that.
Father Stewart, do you, in the Eastern, what archdiocese is your parish?
Antiochian.
Okay. In Eastern Antiochian liturgy, do you sense the altar?
Yes.
So, this was one interesting thing that Jacob pointed out, because Jacob was like, he said to me, what did you say to me, Jacob?
We were talking about. So this is actually something that Yosef thought I should bring up with you, Father. Is while there were some heretics who had temple rituals outside of the actual Temple Mount in Jerusalem, this was in no way normative, and there's no indication that either Jesus or Paul or any of the early Christians found this an acceptable state. And the synagogue services, I mean, there were obviously synagogue services that Jesus went to and Paul went to, and those continued in complete separation from the temple ceremonies. And so this Christian, dare I call, Frankenstein of temple services and synagogue services, it's not a continuation of what Judaism was like before the destruction of the Second Temple. And we would say that the instructions on the interregnum of between the First and the Second Temple was the institution of the prophets for how Jews should act in the absence of the temple. And what is, I hate to say excuse, but what is the foundation for example, creating incense and censers and things which are properly restricted to the temple itself, and using them, if you are continuing the traditions of Jesus and Paul, who instituted these things after the destruction of the temple.
Right. So, it's pretty clear from the book of Acts that Christians continued to, the very first wave of Christians continued to go to synagogues. That's where St. Paul goes when he arrives in a city. He goes to the synagogue, but also to make use of the temple while it still stood, much to the chagrin of a lot of Protestants, but they very clearly did, including making offerings, right?
Sin offerings. So
Bible
the
says
Nazarite
so.
brings the Nazarites
Bible says so.
bring sin offerings.
So you're right. Obviously, this is a change after the temple's no longer there, right? And the way that begins is with the Eucharistic gathering, which starts happening on Sunday, on what gets called the Lord's Day. The Sabbath, still the Sabbath, in every language but English, pretty much, because we like to name our days after pagan gods. So on the Sabbath, they were going to synagogue. They were gathering on the Lord's Day for the Eucharist. And so what seems to have happened is that the Eucharist, from the beginning, and by that I mean from the earliest record we have of the Eucharist, which is St. Paul talking about it in 1 Corinthians, he says it's a sacrifice. He straight out says it. Again, much to a lot of Protestant chagrin. Because when he's explaining how it works, he says, he compares it to the offerings at the temple in Jerusalem, and he compares it negatively, or compares it positively and them negatively, to what the nations offer to demons, right? And he talks about what they offer in the temple to God, what the nations offer to demons, and then the sacrificial offering of the Eucharist. And this is contained, we mentioned this, I think, in our first conversation, in the Greek of Numbers 10:10, right? That the offerings are described as memorials. And so it seems that once the temple is destroyed, now the Eucharist is sort of the last remaining sacrificial offering, right? Because that was not done at the temple. So there's no reason for the Christians to stop doing it when the temple's destroyed, right? And so as Christianity is able to develop, right, they say, well, how are we to offer a sacrifice? Well, the only instructions we have from God for offering a sacrifice come in the Torah, right? Like, there's not another set of, beyond like the words of institution that Christ gives. This is my body, this is my blood, which we repeat, right? So it begins to be offered in that way. And then, of course, when there's the split between Christians and the synagogue, we sort of take the synagogue service, Christianize it somewhat, and tack it onto the beginning. And that's where Frankenstein gets sewn together, I guess, in your metaphor.
Well, who's doing the
but
sewing?
I think that comes
there?
from the sacrificial nature of the Eucharist.
So who is doing the sewing there? Who is? I mean, is it the bishops? Is this the 4th century, 5th century?
Oh no, this is the end of the first, beginning of the 2nd century.
Okay.
Because Saint Ignatius of Antioch starts talking about the anaphora prayers, the sacrificial prayers in front of the Eucharist, and how those are composed. I don't know, you don't like hearing him called Saint Justin Martyr, so I'll call him by the Eastern Orthodox name, Saint Justin the Philosopher.
Well, no, I mean, I just did not feel any compulsion to refer to him as a martyr. Because yeah.
Well, we call him the philosopher, so he was that at least, right? He talks about the elements of the service, of the now sort of the rough order, very bare bones of the now combined service. So this happened pretty early.
So by Justin's time, you would say they're using censers and incense and stuff
middle
like
of the 2nd century. Yeah, they're definitely offering incense. The exact details of that, I mean, you can't prove.
But you would say that. Sorry, go ahead, Jason.
No, you go ahead, Richard. Well, I was just wondering why that's weird. I don't understand why that's a strange thing, because that just seems like an intuitive thing to me.
Well, so I was gonna ask, like, why don't the early Christians in the 1st century do it? Like, why?
Well, when the temple's there, they use the temple.
Right. Well, but you said that they of course you don't do the Eucharist at the temple.
Right.
So if it's a sacrifice, don't you need all of the Levitical instructions for how to do it still?
Sure, but realistically, when you're a group of people who
well, I guess Jesus didn't do it. Is what you would say.
Yeah, but so Saints Paul and Barnabas come to your town in Greece and tell you about this stuff, and then say, come over to Lydia's house on Sunday morning, and like they don't have all the accoutrement,
Right. So then I guess to Jacob's point, like when the temple disappears for the Jews, they go into the exilic modus operandi. So why do the Christians? So I guess the answer would be the Christians feel the need to pick up the temple liturgy because they view the Eucharist as a sacrifice. But they.
I think so. And I also
Okay.
think
Hmm.
there are Christian community, like the Christian community in Alexandria.
Mhm.
Alexandria had this weird Jewish temple
Right.
for a couple of centuries. And I mean, it was weird. It was an obelisk. It was bizarre. And they tried to justify it by pointing to the verse in the Psalm that says there will be an altar of incense to my name in Egypt, right, in Mitzrayim. And so they're like, oh, okay, this is it, right? But and of course Qumran was doing temple stuff,
Right.
sort of, too.
But don't.
So there were early Christian communities that were connected to some of those Jewish communities, even though they would later be considered heretics, right? Who for them there would have been less of a barrier to continuing those kind of things, right? For an Alexandrian Jewish Christian.
So this is Yosef's point. He says that even during their time, those communities were very fringe in Judaism, and like I said, they appear to have been fringe to the early Christians. Go ahead, Jason.
Well, no, I'm still confused at why this is a strange thing, because it just seems like a normal thing to me. Why you would, even in your own house, you would dedicate room to certain things that you set apart as holy. And then, if you sit down to read a book, if you read it by candlelight, it creates a whole different atmosphere. So it just seems like a natural thing people would do to me. Especially, like I could see in times of persecution, and when the temple's gone, you would say, oh, we don't need these things. But even in church, people wear suits. They dress up for a reason. You kind of almost mock people, the pastor in skinny jeans or something that doesn't bring some sort of offering or dresses up in some way. So I feel like, I don't know, maybe I'm not tracking right, but it just seems like if you weren't being persecuted, if the pressure wasn't put on you, I don't know why you wouldn't just naturally, and maybe that's just kind of a pagan thing or something, but I would think you'd just be like, hey, I have this stuff, why not? I should offer it to God. Let's have this, there's this building here, let's create an atmosphere, burn incense in it. Even witches have altars that they burn incense on. They create space which is pagan, I guess, or whatever.
Yeah, but Jason, you know that Aaron's sons brought in a foreign flame, and that did not go well for them.
Yeah, Nadab and Abihu.
Exactly, and they burn, and Aaron's silence is indicative of him understanding.
What? Come on, dude. Seriously.
So
I need to hear this.
Patiently waiting the whole time, and then suddenly, no. But his point, Fezzy's point is precisely the point. In Judaism, what we would say is that the temple services are things which are unique to the temple. We don't bring sacrifices. We don't, because believe Hosea says, right? Take with you words, and neshalma parim sefatenu. We shall become whole through the calves of our lips, right? What the prophets taught between the first and the second temple was how diaspora Judaism was to deal with not having the temple. And so, yes, our services are not exact copies of what existed 2,000 years ago, but they are definitely a continuation, whereas the Christian way of looking at it, and frankly, it seemed to me that the book of Hebrews was a big contribution to that. In adding, that Christians believed they were in a different age, that the destruction of the second temple created a sort of reign of Jesus as the third temple, which completely changed how things were. And this is why, like when it comes down to who is the continuation of Judaism as it existed during the life of Jesus and before, it's my little joke that's kind of not a joke. If you define you define Christianity as those who follow the religion that Jesus taught, the only Christians I know are all Orthodox Jews.
So I'm sorry I was cut off before, but I just wanted to say that post-destruction, obviously, all this gets sort of minimized and internalized into the individual, into the house. So the synagogue is called a mikdash me'at, like a small temple, and the dining room table in a Jewish household is considered like a mizbeach, like an altar. So you can't sit on the dining room table. You would so that it gets congregated around that. Obviously, we have our daily prayers, and this also has to do with like purity laws, right? So now you don't have the temple anymore. That it goes. It's between the family, between the husband and the wife, and how they have to deal with that. So while other religions potentially decided to follow through or continue some of these traditions, seemingly in Pharisaic Judaism, that was really that was once the temple was destroyed, that was internalized. And I would ask you, Father, if you are aware of the theory that in the New Testament, all the rhetoric against the Pharisees are speaking to a specific group of the Pharisees, to the Shammai house of Pharisees, and not the Hillelian school of Pharisees where Jesus comes from. So a lot of the attack was, there was like a big, historically speaking, there was a split at that time between those two schools of thought, specifically with regards to salvation of the Gentile.
Right. Yeah. I think there's probably a lot of truth to that. The thing I emphasize two things. Number one, the reason the Pharisees are so significant is that they were the other group that survived the destruction of the temple, right? But also that the criticism is always not you're wrong, you're heretics. Even for those Pharisees, it's you're hypocrites, right? One of the most important things for that is sort of the nuanced critique that Jesus gives, where he says, you tithe of mint and dill and cumin, right? You're out there in your herb garden cutting off a tenth, of all of the herbs. He said, but you neglect justice, compassion, right? These much greater things. But then what he says is, you should have done these while not neglecting the other also.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? Like you should have right, all of these things. And so I see most of that criticism as sort of a refocusing, right? And an intensification. And I know Jacob still disagrees with me. Who knows someday? But I think that's what St. Paul is doing with the works of the law too.
Mm.
I really think you can make a case when he talks about the works of the law. He's not talking about keeping commandments or doing good works. He's talking about putting an overemphasis on the detailed elements of purity code that separate Jew from Gentile, rather than paying attention to those things if you're Jewish, and also the weightier things, right?
So Fezzy reminded me of something which I kind of wanted to hook back to what you said about the Eucharist being a sacrifice and the Kiddush, because it really seems to me that the Eucharist is an extension of the Kiddush ceremony. And Fezzy is absolutely right that we do analogize that to a sacrifice, to the mizbeach of at the Kiddush, an altar. And I guess, I mean, it would be very foreign to Jews to, have incense or anything like that, partially because it's the Sabbath. But this idea that, you're eating meat and you're singing and there's the wine and there's the salt and there's the bread and all of the components of, in fact, the temple service in a way at the Kiddush table. And I have to say, I am preparing somehow to get some Kiddush wine for that conference on Friday night. We'll have to do a little Kiddush. But
Can I invite you?
Are you coming, Richard, to the conference too?
Wait, is this the Chino conference or a different conference?
This is the Lord of Spirits conference in October. Although, Father Stephen, we would love to have you. We're planning a conference in Jerusalem, February 24th, 2024. You're more than welcome to join us.
I will look into it, but that would be very difficult for me for a bunch of reasons.
February what, Jacob?
February 24th. It's going to be Purim Katan. So, yeah.
None of them to do with you, all of them to do with Orthodox Church politics and all the approvals you have to get as an Orthodox priest.
Oh, to go to Jerusalem?
Go from, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
I have to get permission from my patriarch, the Patriarch of Jerusalem.
Simply to go to simply to visit?
Wow.
As a priest, yeah. Yeah. For me to go into another bishop's territory.
Oh,
we don't like clergy wandering around.
This is really funny. A segment of my family converted to their Baha'i, and they have to get permission to go to Israel in their religion. Baha'i people are not allowed to live in Israel, so it's been a difficult thing sometimes when family wants to visit, just getting permission to stay. Yeah.
It's not just Jerusalem. When I went and spoke in England last August, and I had to get permission from my metropolitan here and the metropolitan over there and get everybody to sign off. So
Father,
it's even harder to go to
Father, when you mentioned that Jesus is going to the Pharisees and saying, you're worried about the tenth of your herb, but your actions basically, you're not. So how does that? Why are we not there still? Where do we go off? Where then all these 613 get abandoned? And I don't want to say get abandoned. You could potentially say that they get fully internalized, but where do we see that? Where do we get off the hook?
Well, I don't. So my read of St. Paul is that he's making the fairly traditional Jewish distinction most of the time that Gentiles aren't accountable to a lot of that. That those aren't directed to Gentiles at all. And so as the church becomes predominantly Gentile, I think that's a big part of that shift. And part of the issue, and I've talked about this with Jacob, a lot of it wasn't, I don't think, on the channel. I think it was conversations we had that weren't streamed. I think the biggest obstacle to Jewish Christians doing that now is that a lot of that has to be kind of practiced in community. And here's what I mean by that. So if I had an Orthodox Jewish person here in Lafayette who decided they wanted to become part of the Orthodox Church, while I would say on an objective basis that, they should continue to live as Jewish people, right? And follow those things. We don't keep a kosher kitchen at the church, right? Because
I understand, but do you see that as
like I couldn't tell them like, okay, well, you can't eat with the rest of the church because you need to keep kosher, and we don't. So we're gonna make you this like exile, right? Like you're not really going to be integrated. That's the big obstacle. But there are there's an Orthodox priest who's Jewish who he believes that as time goes on and as we approach the end of days, that there may be larger conversions of Jewish people, in which case there would be Jewish Christian churches that would be able to practice those things still in community.
Well, I read his book, right? That's the he's the one who wrote Orthodoxy, Jewish, and Christian.
Yeah.
And so my question is, I mean, does he wear tzitzit? Does he put on phylacteries?
I don't know if he does at home. He might. He might. I mean, when he's at, because his parish is mostly not Jewish Christians, so he vests.
Well, I mean, yeah, that gets.
But yeah,
that's why I particularly, I mean, the tzitzit. So we know. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that Jesus wore tzitzit.
Right.
You know, the word krispidon, which is the Greek word for that's used regarding Jesus's garments, is the Aramaic term for tzitzit. And so, I mean, yes, I understand the kosher food thing can get complex, especially incident at Antioch, all of that, right?
Yeah.
But when it comes down to tzitzit, right? If a Jew becomes an Orthodox Christian, if Paul within Judaism is correct, I see absolutely no reason why that person wouldn't wear at least tzitzit.
Yeah, I would not. If that person were my parish, I would have no issues with that. That would not be an issue to me.
Fascinating.
So, Jacob, does that answer satisfy you, or would you want Father Stephen to exert pressure on the Orthodox Jew to follow?
Well, look, I mean, if Paul within Judaism really is Paul within Judaism, that he was simply making a distinction. And so it really bothers me when Christians call the law of God cultural things, as if like me putting on phylacteries or keeping kosher are somehow, and this is really how the Messianic movement became completely divorced from Baptists. Was Baptists, when the Baptists created their synagogues, they really went, you know, in China we would have a Chinese church, and in sub-Saharan Africa we will have elements of sub-Saharan culture, and so let's create a culturally appropriate church for Jews. But when people were actually in that synagogue, right, treating these things like tzitzit as if they're just a cultural artifact, that it's not something that is commanded by God, right? That's, I mean, how do you get from A to B? How do you get from you know, me putting on tefillin is somehow equivalent to somebody who's Chinese deciding to not eat with chopsticks anymore.
Right. And so part of this is, there's a couple things here, right? So yeah, I would not say those are Jewish cultural things. I would say, you know, getting Chinese food on Christmas Day is a Jewish cultural thing. These are commandments in the Torah, right?
That was funny.
But so the Orthodox Church at least has a very different view of the relationship between quote unquote culture, which of course the word culture even derives from the word cult. So, the meaning has drifted a lot. But and that's reflected in the fact that we have Greek Orthodox churches, Russian Orthodox churches, Serbian Orthodox churches, right? Someone can envision in the future a Jewish Orthodox church, right? This issue of that there is essentially, so when you get to St. Paul, there already is a Jewish identity that's been defined by the Torah, right? And the worship of God, this already exists. There's also already a Greek identity, but unfortunately, Greek identity at the time of St. Paul is mainly focused around demon worship and pederasty, right? So the Greeks love it when I say that too. So that has to change, right? And so one way of approaching that was, well, they just need to become Jewish, right? And St. Paul is saying, no, that's not how this works. They don't need to become Jewish. They need to stay Greeks. But being Greek has to come to mean something different. And so a Greek Christian identity gets forged, and that takes a couple of centuries. And it's messy, right? You read his letters to the church at Corinth, it was really messy, right? They were trying to bring all kinds of pagan things into the church, and he's having to tell them, no, right? And over again. But that gets forged. And so that's part of the reason why the Orthodox Church is such a mess in the United States. And there is no American Orthodox Church yet, because there is no, and this will make the Protestants upset at me, but they probably already are. So there is no American Christian identity.
But by virtue of Protestantism.
Well,
the way
so to me, it's actually more difficult to forge an authentically American Christian identity than it was with Greek paganism, because the distinctions are so much more subtle and difficult to make. Because we've deceived ourselves into just thinking that American values are Christian. And
Father,
so
Jason, Richard, Jacob, see you guys later. It was a pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you so much for all you guys are doing. We'll talk.
So that's a much more difficult distinction to make. And so what we have is, I'm the priest in an Antiochian church where we're doing things in Arabic, also some French, right? And English, right? And we're following the practices of that sort of Arab Christian identity that was forged over the course of centuries, or they're following the Greek Christian identity, while we hammer out, right, what this American Christian identity is going to be, and what a transformed kind of American culture looks like. To really transform American culture, we'd have to become an Orthodox Christian country, which I don't see happening in the near future, but all things are possible with God. But so there's still that hammering that's happening, right? But so because that's our approach to culture, I think that lets us look at the Jewish identity differently than the Southern Baptist, who just thinks cultures are interchangeable matters of food and clothing and that kind of thing that you just slap over the gospel, right? So, and you can see that very plainly, for example, in evangelical, the way evangelicalism addresses itself to music. They'll bring in whatever style of music right out of the culture with very little thought, right? Whereas we have all a cappella chant. And it's going to be in a slightly different style if you're in a Slavic church than a Byzantine church, but it's still going to be a cappella chant. It's still going to be different than, it's not just going to be Hey, right?
No electric guitar.
No acoustic
Bro,
guitar.
What? No banjo?
No banjo, no blowing in a jug,
Oh my
no
God.
playing the washboard.
bro,
Even in Appalachia, which is where I was before.
I'm in a band. Well, I'm not in a band, but I'm trying out a worship band here at my own, where the band leader wants to have like dubstep EDM beats set to the
Right,
worship
yeah.
music on backing track. I'm just so
Yeah.
quietly saying, okay. But I have my Orthodox Church on Sunday. That keeps
Yeah.
me grounded, so I'm all good.
But yeah, if we have those Jewish Christian churches in the future, I would expect them to be using the style of chanting that you have in a synagogue
Right.
service,
I-
right? When
I have a
scripture is
question.
read, that kind of thing. I would not only say that's permitted, I would expect that to be the case, right? Like,
Well, it would be in Hebrew, and then there would be the cancellations, which are, traditional, and we would say, ancient.
yeah. I mean, that's what I would expect to happen.
Jason?
So resolved, we just need a lot of Jewish people to convert to Orthodox Christianity and take over the Patriarchate of Jerusalem and make Christianity Jewish again. It'll be good.
I don't see that happening unless
I don't either, but
there
it'd
be
be-
miracles. Yes, I guess.
Oh. Why is that?
Well,
I mean, honestly,
variety of
if
reasons.
you just read this, if you just read it, like, I mean, I don't know.
well, I ultimately, I mean, there is a serious and real question about Israel as a nation of priests and as a people set apart, and the fact is that I think as I understand early Christianity, in early Christianity, all the bishops were Jewish, not merely because they just happened to be Jewish, but because there was, and in Judaism, there continues to be an idea of a priesthood of Israel as a leadership role among the nations. And the temple, ultimately, yes, the other nations bring their sacrifices, but they bring their sacrifices to a priesthood of Israel.
Yeah, I still don't see why that means we couldn't take over the Patriarchate of Jerusalem.
Will all the priests and bishops be Jews?
Well, if there was that kind of mass conversion, then yeah. Once you get the Patriarchate, he can ordain whoever he wants.
If you want to give me the Patriarchate of Jerusalem, I'll take it.
There's some first steps, though. You have to go through all the way there. I don't think you're ready to take those steps yet.
Jacob, have you told Father Stephen about your Hasidic Christianity?
Hasidic Christianity, yes. So Hasidic, I mean, Neo-Hasidism has been spreading beyond the Orthodox Jewish community, because honestly, like, yes, I come from the Hasidic movement within Judaism, and I believe that the teachings of Hasidism do propel themselves beyond Jewish bounds in a way that just Judaism itself has not before. And yeah, so I mean, but this comes from a very particular belief, even within Judaism, and so it's hard for me to make clear that I am, already when I asked my rabbi to listen to our discussions and tell me if like I should delete my channel or not. he said, as long as you're not representing your views and as Judaism, as okay, this is what Judaism is. He thought there was value to these discussions that we're having, and that's a liberty that I, as somebody who doesn't have the beard and isn't a rabbi and can have discussions that, frankly, I mean, it's we're dealing with, if somebody is going to misunderstand me, either Christian or Jewish, that's a huge problem if I speak with any sort of authority, and I try very hard not to speak with any sort of authority because of that. And I mean, I think that constrains how freely Father Stephen, who is an authority and an ordained priest, can speak in a venue like this.
It should, if I were a wiser person. So I'm gonna have to. It's later, a couple hours later here where I am. I'm gonna have to get going so my wife doesn't get mad at me.
Thank you so much for dropping in.
My pleasure. I really just wanted to talk to Richard about the whole prophetic fulfillment thing, but
Thank you.
it's good to see everyone else too.
It was nice to meet you, Father.
It
was nice
good to meet you.